For section 8.6, we're going to look at cars. Okay, so the kind of the main thing we're going to look at here is the formula that we use to calculate a monthly payment or a payment. It doesn't necessarily have to be monthly, but we're going to look at the formula for calculating a payment. We will also look at some pros and cons for buying versus leasing. We'll look at some pros and cons for buying used versus buying new. And then we will also look at gas mileage and kind of like the fuel cost for whatever type of car you have. So we're going to start out with topic one, which is on installment loans. Okay. So I've said this many times. I'm going to say it again. You know, I love to start with a good definition. So here we are. An installment loan is a loan that you repay over time with a series of regular payments. I put monthly in here twice by accident. So you are going to pay something back over time. So cars and homes are really common, okay? You can't pay off a car in a few weeks, it's going to take you years. You can't pay off a home in a few months, it's going to take you years, okay? So you're going to make a series of regular payments. They are typically monthly, okay? You could certainly have a situation where you may have a bi-monthly payment or a weekly payment, but generally speaking, they're going to be monthly, okay? Examples of installment loans would be car loans, mortgages. You could have different personal loans, sometimes student loans, okay? So these are kind of like bigger loans, like bigger things you're paying off over time, okay? An advantage to an installment loan is that the customer can begin using the product immediately. When I was a kid, there was something called layaway. So you could go to like Kmart or other stores, like think department stores in the mall, and like your mom might go and start planning for Christmas in, August or September. So she may know that little Johnny wants this Nintendo or something, so she can't buy the Nintendo today. So she puts it on layaway. That means whatever store would keep it in some little hidden, stock room, and she would pay this off over time, and then once she finished paying it off, then she got the Nintendo to take home and wrap up and put under the Christmas tree for Johnny. Okay, that's a little bit different than an installment loan. With an installment loan, you get the car right away, you get the home right away, but you're going to pay off over time. Same thing with like student loans. You get your education right away, and then you pay it off over a set number of years. Okay, so that's a big advantage, is you can go ahead and start using what you have. All right. Now, car loans are an example of fixed installment loans, meaning that the interest rate and the payment stay the same throughout the life of the loan. So this part right here, fixed installment loan, means that you know what to expect. So you kind of are calculated a monthly payment and you know what to expect every single month. It doesn't change, okay? So what's really cool about this is this makes your payment predictable. Okay, so you know what to expect each month. There are different types of loans. There's variable rate loans, and your interest rate can go up and down, and there's different, criteria for that. But for us in this class, we're just going to talk about fixed installment loans. Okay? Now, the formula is kind of a nasty one, but if you can do annuities, you can do the payment formula, okay? What I do want to point out here is we do say that this formula is it's PMT, so think PMT for payment. Otherwise, the other components stay the same. So instead of having an A, like a lot of our formulas had A for future value, this formula won't have an A, but it does have PMT for payment. So this is the formula. In previous sections, I mentioned, especially for online students that don't have access to the printed copy of the formula sheet that I give. So like if you have me face to face, you get a paper copy of the formula sheet. If you have me online, you need to start creating your own formula sheet. The worst thing you can do is flipping back and forth through a dozen plus pages looking for formulas. So get a sheet of paper, and as you've been working through these videos, hopefully you've been putting each of these formulas on just like one go-to sheet of paper, okay? There's definitely a formula sheet in Moodle that you can print, but if you don't have access to printing, make sure you're making your own formula sheet. This is one that definitely needs to go on your formula sheet, okay? So PMT equals the generally monthly, but let me not put the actual word monthly. We're going to put the regular payment amount. And like I said, it's almost always monthly. So generally monthly. All right. P is the principal. This is how much you borrow, how much you're actually borrowing for your car or your home or your whatever. In this case, we're going to talk specifically cars. So this is principal. So this is the amount borrowed. And then the other pieces you're going to be familiar with. R is your interest rate. Remember, we use it as a decimal in the formulas. T is time in years. And then N is the number of payments made per year. So number of payments per year. So again, if you're dealing with like kind of a typical setup where you're going to make monthly payments, N is going to be 12. So it's just how many payments you make per year. All right. So let's look at an example. All right. So for example one, it says, suppose that you decide to borrow 15,000 for a new car. You have two loan options to choose from. Okay. Installment loan A is a 4-year loan at 7%. Installment loan B is a 6-year loan at 8%. And that is something that, like, if you notice here, we have a shorter loan, like as in the number of years is shorter and we have a lower interest rate. That's somewhat common. Let me see if I can get my words out. That is a somewhat common thing you'll see, that the shorter the loan, the better the interest rate in some cases. Okay. Not always, but it could be. All right. Now, be very cautious. Sometimes you would be asked to find what is called a down payment. So a down payment is a percentage paid up front. So you could have a lender who's like, hey, we'll let you borrow the money for this car, but you have to pay 10% up front. So that would be a down payment. You'd have to come up with 10% of the cost of the car that you pay in cash right then. And then the rest of it would be a loan. Okay. In this section, we're not going to talk about down payments, but when we start talking about houses in 8.7, we will for sure bring back down payments. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at installment loan A. So part A here says find the monthly payments and total interest for loan A. Okay, so PMT. First of all, for the formula, let me see if I can squeeze them both into the same. Yeah, we're good here. So for the formula we need for PMT, the numerator of this formula, we take P, which is how much we're borrowing. So we're going to borrow 15,000. We multiply it by our interest rate divided by N. Okay, we're going to make monthly payments here. So that tells me N is 12. So I'm going to take my interest rate, which is 7%, so 0.07. I'm going to divide it by 12. I'm going to take that whole thing and I'm going to divide it by parentheses, 1 minus parentheses, 1 plus. Okay, this formula is a little bit nasty. So 1 minus 1 plus R over N, so 0.07 divided by 12, raised to the negative N times T. Make sure you get that negative. So negative N is 12, and then T is 4. Remember, we had a 4-year loan here. And then we need to end our parentheses, and we'll go straight to the calculator. Okay? So I'll show you this on a calculator and on Desmos, okay? I think it's the screen. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so on the calculator, remember we can go alpha y equals. It pulls up this fraction menu. We want to choose the first option, which will just give us like a simple numerator denominator. For the numerator, we have 15,000. And then we're going to multiply that by parentheses R over N, so 0.07 divided by 12. The denominator, we're going to start brackets, so just regular parentheses on this calculator, and we're going to go 1 minus, and then parentheses, 1 plus R over N, so plus 0.07 divided by 12. End your parentheses, go to the exponent, and we want to make sure we get a negative, and be really careful on this calculator. On this calculator, there's a negative button and there's a minus button, and they are not the same. We want to make sure we get the negative button, which is in this bottom row of buttons next to enter. So negative N times T, so 12 times 4, and then leave the exponent and end your parentheses, and then hit enter, okay? And we're going to round this just regular mathematically, okay? So we get a monthly payment of $359.19, okay? Let's do the exact same thing, but this time we'll go to Desmos, okay? So let me scoot over to Desmos. So PMT equals P, which is how much you're borrowing, so 15,000. And then in parentheses, we're going to take R divided by N, so 0.07 divided by 12. And then once you type this in, just do the little slash for division and it'll create your denominator. Okay. And we want parentheses 1 minus parentheses 1 plus r over n, so 0.07 divided by 12. And we want an exponent, so remember, hold down shift and then type in 6. And we want negative, well, let me put it in parentheses. Remember, you got to put your exponent in parentheses here if you have more than just like a number. So we're going to go negative n, which is 12, times t, which is 4. And then we want to leave the exponent and end our parentheses. And again, you can hit enter if you need to, because like for me, it's just habit to hit enter. But keep in mind down here, this little grayed out area, that is your answer. So we get 359.19, which is exactly the same thing. So let's go back to the worksheet. All right, so the monthly payment here is $359.19 per month. All right, now that is not it for Part A. Part A says find the monthly payment and total interest. So how on earth would we figure out the interest? Well, we have to start by figuring out how much we paid out, okay? So it's how much we pay out. Well, let me put a space in there. How much we pay out minus the principal. So principal being how much we borrowed. So how much we paid out is PMT times N times T minus just plain old P. Okay, so PMT for us was 359.19. We paid this 12 times a year for 4 years. And then we borrowed 15,000. So the difference is going to be how much interest we ended up paying. So let's first of all figure out how much we paid out. So I'm just going to use the handheld for this because it's just basic multiplication. So in your calculator, do 359.19 times 12 times 4. So over the life of this loan, over the 4 years, we paid out $17,241.12. We borrowed only $15,000. So the difference here is $2,241.12 in interest. So over the course of 4 years, you paid back your $15,000 plus $2,241.12 in interest. Okay? So that is loan A. Let's look at loan B. Loan B is a little bit different. It's a 6-year loan and it's at 8%. So the formula is going to be the same, but we're going to trade out the 6 for T and the 0.08 for R. Okay? So we get PMT, the payment, is equal to whatever we borrowed, 15,000 times the interest rate, which is 8%. N is still going to be 12. We're looking for a monthly payment. We're going to divide that by 1 minus parentheses 1 plus R over N, so 0.08 divided by 12, raised to the negative NT, so negative 12 times 6 power. So let's go to the calculator and, of course, Desmos. All right, let's go to the calculator. Now, one thing you can do, and you don't have to do this, but if you don't want to keep typing in the same formula over and over, you can just hit the up arrow on this calculator. And when your formula is highlighted, just hit enter. It kind of grabs it and it brings it back down here. And then you can just hit the back button and type over the pieces that change. So for example, T in this formula changes. T is 6, and then R is 0.08. So I can change that 7 to an 8. Just make sure you change it in both places, the numerator and the denominator. And some people like to do that instead of retyping the formula. It's up to you. It doesn't bother me one way or the other. So we're going to hit enter and we're going to see what this monthly payment would be. So going 2 decimal places, this one's a little tricky because we've got 262.998. That 8 rounds the 99 up, so this actually is going to round to an even $263. Okay? So mathematically rounding, we get 263 bucks. Actually, let's go to Desmos now. So let's see, we're borrowing 15,000. We're going to multiply that by R over N, so 0.08 divided by 12. We're going to divide all of that by parentheses 1 minus parentheses 1 plus R over N, so 0.08 divided by 12. Sorry, I have a very cluttered space right here. I don't have like a big workspace, so it's a little awkward. We want to raise that to the parentheses, negative 12 times 6 power. And then we want to leave the exponent and end the parentheses. And again, you can see down here in the corner, we get 262 right here. We get 262.9986, which is going to round to $263. Okay. So whether you use the calculator or Desmos, you get the same thing. So we get $263 per month. And again, we need to calculate the interest. Okay. So the interest is going to be PMT times N times T minus P. So 263 times 12, we make this payment 12 times a year for 6 years. We're still just going to subtract 15,000. So using your handheld, let's see, 263 times 12 times 6. This time we paid out a total of $18,936. When we subtract what we borrowed, that tells me that the interest on this loan is $3,936. So what does this mean? This means we have two wildly different options, okay? And that's kind of what Part C is asking. So it says for Part C, compare the monthly payments and total interest for the two loans. So basically, if you choose the 4-year loan, you have a higher payment, but you pay less overall. Okay, so I'm going to highlight two really important numbers here. This number and this number. That's how much you actually pay out. Okay, it's the same car. It's still 15,000, but you've got two different loan options. One is less time and a lower interest rate. The other one is more time and a higher interest rate. Okay, so how does this impact you financially? Well, if you can swing it, if you can come up with $359.19 each month, you're going to save money in the long run because total you only pay $17,241.12. Whereas if you get the other loan, loan B, you're going to have a much lower monthly payment. So your payment's going to be lower by not quite $100, okay? But in the long run, over the course of those 6 years, you're actually going to pay quite a bit more in interest, okay? So I would say loan A is, if you do the math, it ends up being $96.19 more per month, but is $1,694.88 cheaper in the long run. So this really comes down to personal situations. If you can come up with that extra $96.19 a month, you're going to save a lot in the long run. You're going to save almost $1,700 in the long run by choosing loan A. But in some cases, you just can't come up with that extra $96.19 a month, and you really have to choose loan B. So there's no right or wrong answer. It all comes down to your personal situation. However, if this all comes down to which loan option is cheaper, loan A is definitely cheaper. Even though it costs you more per month in the long run, you're going to save almost $1,700 on that car. Okay? So there you have that. In the next video, we're going to talk about leasing versus buying, and then buying new versus buying used. And then in the final video, we'll talk about the final video is the cost of gasoline. All right, so I'll see you back here for leasing versus buying and buying new versus buying used.